So a few years ago, I partnered with a small nonprofit to take their DEI efforts to the next level. Overall, the group was really great, except for one disagreeable leader. Let's call him Bob. Bob challenged everything the group said. If the group was discussing DEI practices for making clients feel like they belong, Bob would shut it down. If the group was brainstorming potential community partnerships to better serve a marginalized group, Bob would push back. Initially, I was convinced that Bob was going to be the thorn in my side and make the work unnecessarily difficult. So I ended up scheduling a series of one-on-one meetings with Bob to better learn about him and his background. And we ended up bonding over our shared love of the library. And he told me a lot of stories of his time in the library system. And luckily, I had a few library clients, so we went back and forth in our conversation. That's when I learned that Bob was still going to be a thorn in my side, but in a really, really good way. He challenged everything because he was curious, not because he wanted to be critical. He shared how he has a high standard for DEI because of what he was able to achieve in his previous roles and what he wanted DEI to be. He wanted the group to be successful and not just, chase trends or best practices just because other organizations were doing it. It was at that point that I realized that Bob's activation energy was higher than the rest of the groups. He required more to initiate change. He needed more evidence, more thoughtfulness, more impact. What I knew inherently that, everyone required something different to facilitate change was backed by science, specifically chemistry, and it convinced me that there's a science to DEI. Chemistry, activation energy is the minimum amount of energy required to initiate a chemical change. I know that sounds complicated, but let me explain. Every element on the periodic table of elements has a different activation energy. So for example, when iron interacts with water and air, it doesn't take long for rust to appear. Iron has a low activation energy. Aluminum, on the other hand, has a higher activation energy level. Aluminum needs more than just water and air to cause a reaction. Aluminum needs heat, a stronger chemical, or even a physical disruption for change to occur. And here's a fun fact. Aluminum actually creates a protective layer when exposed to air that protects it from water. The energy that makes iron take action makes aluminum go into self-preservation mode. The analogies here are endless, and I could go in a million different ways, but I just thought that that was a fun fact to share. So what does this mean for humans as we practice DEI? There are several lessons here. Lesson number 1, every person has a different activation energy level. Some people have a low activation energy level. Doesn't take much to get them to act. Some people have a moderate activation energy level that requires more. Maybe it's more data, more resources, more agitation. And some people have a high activation energy level or are even non-reactive. And activating non-reactive folks, that's a lesson for another day. But science tells us that there's no one size fits all that gets people to take action, as cliche as that sounds. Lesson number 2, we are responsible for discovering and reaching our own activation energy level. So what do you need to take action? What will cause you to move? Do you need to feel heat? Do you need more information and data? Do you need training? Is it all of the above? Is it something else? Most folks can identify the thing when it happens, and that's okay too. If you've reached your activation energy level previously, what did it take? This is a great time to do a little bit of reflecting here. Number 3, we have to make space for everyone to reach their activation energy level in the time that it takes them to reach it. As much as we want this one thing, whatever that thing is, to be the thing that activates everyone, sometimes it isn't. When folks eventually reach their activation energy level, we have to make space for reflection and learning. Now, this isn't an excuse for folks to take forever. Hello, catalysts. But Even with external forces speeding up the reaction, it takes however long it takes. There are a few questions to consider as you think through your activation energy level. What is your activation energy level? What gets you to take action on a day-to-day basis? What gets you to take action at a higher level? And now I want you to flex those critical thinking skills. I want you to consider how your activation energy level might be different for various social issues. For example, which elements on the table of diversity require a lower level of energy for you to act? Here's an example. Now that I'm a parent, I'm highly reactive to issues related to childbirth and public education. My activation energy level is low for these issues. It doesn't take a lot for me to show up to a PTA meeting, voice my concern to my school board member, or even call the principal of my son's school. And fun fact, I actually volunteer in the school library weekly so that I can be proactive in facilitating change. On the other hand, my activation energy was higher for disability issues and rights. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't see or know the ways that the world was not accommodating to people with disabilities. Growing up, I didn't have a close relationship with anyone with a disability that gave me, that glimpse into their day-to-day life. The lack of exposure made my activation energy higher, meaning it took a lot more for me to take action. When I became an adult, I realized this. I began educating myself, building genuine friendships with people with disabilities, and volunteering with organizations that serve people with disabilities. Doing this work on myself became a catalyst that lowered my activation energy. If this makes sense, or as someone in a previous video said, if this tickles your brain in a really interesting way, or if it doesn't make sense and you want more information, then you should meet me in the Science of DEI lab. And that's where learning meets doing. We experiment, make discoveries, and take meaningful action in a safe and supportive environment. You can learn more at www.scienceofdeilab.com. Thanks so much for joining me. Bye.